Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by aliens who look a lot like humans, because why would another planet produce anything different? Now, let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome everybody to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Prognosis Negative. Bring your friends to see the movie everyone's talking about. The reviews are positive. The prognosis is negative.
So good.
Welcome everybody to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I'm Todd.
And this is a film podcast where filmmakers and producers and actors kind of break apart films to learn how to be better filmmakers and appreciate the artistic side of what goes into making a movie, different ways you can interpret it. I really love, one of the things we do a lot is kind of look beyond just what's obvious about a movie. Like if it's whatever about a space, ship landing and aliens invading, sure, that works as a sci-fi, but usually like sci-fi can work really well to discuss topical elements and things that are happening in society, and it's a way to kind of put a layer, a metaphor, on something that's very real and very universal that could be happening in the world. Today will be actually the first time we're not doing something that's a narrative, and I'm pretty excited about that. This is, what are we going to cover today?
So today we are covering 13th, the documentary by Ava DuVernay that's on Netflix. It's been, I think it was released in 2017, around there. So it's been on there for a while. So if you have not seen that, please pause the episode and go watch it. We're going to be talking about a lot of stuff, but we would rather, for sure, you come with your own, go watch it with your own preconceived notions, but then be open to hearing lots of different sides, but formulating your own opinions before, listening to what we have to say, because and then leave comments and stuff. I mean, this is, obviously we want everybody to leave comments about any episode that we cover, anything ranging from the how it was made to the why to the content of what was made. I mean, all of that is really important. I feel like this is something that is, people are going to have probably more opinions than even, watching a Michael Bay film. And I know everybody has those opinions, so go watch the movie before, the documentary before listening to us.
Absolutely.
What are we gonna cover about it?
There's so much to cover about this film. Not just the content is obviously very striking and just begs for conversation around it, but even whenever I first watched this, there was so much about the filmmaking side that Ava really captured me with Selma. And after that, I went back and watched her first documentary that she made about hip hop, and I'm forgetting the name of it right now. But there was in LA, there was this club of hip hop freestyling that was just going on down there, and it was interesting. But to see the contrast between that and this, what a huge gap in growth. It's absolutely incredible, and reminds me of Medicine for Melancholy and Moonlight. There was just this magical, like, holy crap, it gave me hope. Like, to see what these people are doing in their craft is absolutely astonishing. And so there's so much great stuff to take out of this, and so I feel like we're going to kind of have two conversations around it. For sure, on the filmmaking side, like the cinematography is absolutely fantastic, especially when you start to see a lot of the metaphor that she's inserting into the camera work. It's beautiful and really astounding, at least I think, as well as the editing. There's some really smart, simple things that she's doing in the editing that really help to land this thing, because it's only an hour and 40 minutes and it covers a ton. And so a lot of the editing really helps to make sure everything's landing very cleanly. But
let's be clear, that hour and 40 minutes is a quick hour and 40 minutes because it's so chock full of everything that you never knew, or that you did, but it's reminding you of in a very visceral way. So you're just like in it the entire time. It goes by really fast. hour and 40-minute documentaries feel like 2 hour and 40-minute documentaries. Let's be honest. But not this one. For all those reasons you talked about.
Yeah, not this one. And then beyond that, we'll dive into, more personal stuff. We're keenly aware that we're, two white guys just, touching on discussing race and the system, police. And so we'll have, a few stories from not us about casual encounters with police. And we'll also probably touch on some of the protests in Austin. And through it all, I mean, we know that this will be the most charged episode that we've ever done. But we'll do it in our vein. Like, I think people expect smart, casual, thoughtful conversation from us, and I don't think we'll stray too much from that. But forgive anything if you disagree, man. Like Todd said, it's okay. You can come into this with an open mind. We'll do the same. And if you want to talk about it in the comments, we're happy to discuss any thoughts, as long as it's all respectful. I think that's the most that we could hope for. So we'll cover all that and other such stuff and things and stuff.
So a synopsis of the film. An in-depth look at the prison system in the United States and how it reveals the nation's history of racial inequality. Directed by Ava DuVernay, written by Spencer Averick and Ava DuVernay, cinematography by Roger Deakins, the great.
No, sorry.
I was like,
totally
wait a minute.
Botched that. Yeah.
I was like, Roger Deakins.
That would be incredible.
And Shawshank. That's crazy. All right, let's start. Yeah. Directed by Ava DuVernay, written by Spencer Averick and Ava DuVernay, featuring Michelle Alexander, Cory Booker, Angela Davis, Kalief Browder, and Newt Gingrich, to name a few.
On the night of his arrest, Kalief Browder was walking home from a party with his friends in the Bronx when he was stopped by police.
Kalief was charged with a crime, a really petty crime that it turns out he didn't commit.
Then they said, we're going to take you to the precinct, and most likely we're going to let you go home. And then I never went home.
They told you that you could post bail.
Yes, that's correct.
$10,000.
Yes.
And of course,
I couldn't make that. My family couldn't pay it.
There are thousands of people in jails right this moment that are sitting there for no other reason than because they're too poor to get out.
We have a criminal justice system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. Wealth, not culpability, shapes outcomes.
And I think what most Americans think of, because they've watched so many courtroom dramas and things like that, they think that the criminal justice system is about judges and juries. Well, that's really stopped being the case.
The system simply cannot exist if everyone decides to go to trial.
Everybody insisted on a trial, the whole system would shut down.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just one of many.
Right. That was maybe 60 seconds of just earful of information and eye-opening. I mean, the whole idea that Kalief Browder's sat in the jail for 3 years in a prison system for multiple years just because he refused to plead guilty for something he did not do should be an outrage no matter what side of the whole law and order fence you want to sit on. Injustice is injustice. I don't think we need to, beg people to agree with that. That should be, something that we're all behind. That's a big thing that America is supposed to be about. And so, how many times?
Should be.
Yeah. How many times have you seen 13th? And I don't know, what's been some of your reaction to it?
This is my third time to see it. I saw it when it first came out and then immediately rewatched it because I couldn't really, we'll address this, I guess, head on. I'm a white middle class male. I, who, grew up in the suburbs. Like, I don't have any idea of any of this shit. Like, I am well aware that I'm ignorant to it. Does that make me a bad person? No, I didn't, no, but that's just how I was brought up. I can't control that. But at the same time, growing up, whenever I'd see, movies about this kind of stuff, like Amistad is a really great example of like an old movie that like the first time I ever really was introduced to the idea of what it was like, not, not even dramatized, just like the raw, visceral, like, you know, abuse, power and of any, you know, human life. It like really shook me. And so seeing this, which is like basically the real version of a movie version of this, was like just completely overwhelming. So I had to immediately rewatch it. I think I watched it the very next day, if not that same night, and just to kind of digest all this. And then I you know, didn't watch it again until this episode. And it is just as visceral as it was the first time I saw it. It's like every time, from somebody from my vantage point, every time you see something like this, it's like the first time, because you can't even process that this would even exist, that this would happen in 2020, 2015, 1995, whatever. Hell, even 1960. Can't even imagine what it was like. So, yeah, it was incredible. And just, you know, that aside, the actual filmmaking is kind of mind-boggling. It's like, you know, if I were to want to make a documentary, this is the kind of way that I would want to do it. I mean, it's engaging, it's like moving, it's topical, it's timely, timely for the time they're talking about. I mean, they play rap songs over, you know, like with modern day text, you know, kind of like flying onto the screen and stuff that brings you in. It helps you remember, oh yeah, I remember that song from when I was in junior high or whatever. But, you know, they're flashing the words on the screen, so you're like, oh, wait a minute, I never really understood what that song was really about. And now you're playing this song butted up against what people are talking about. And now I'm seeing this experience with that experience that really happened. That experience that really happened married with this song and these lyrics. And it's just so engaging. And the cinematography of all the interviews is amazing. And the way that they kind of like, you know, bring in the old footage or old photos and like kind of cut it up into this kind of paper mache style is like beautiful. It's like just keeps you hanging on. And then also there are all these little breaths, right? So like they'll smash you with all of this stuff that happened, all of these details, all of these, you know, like you know, this person says this person says then this person, and then you see Newt Gingrich. And he'll like pause, and there'll be some silence, purposeful silence. It's like obvious that they inserted this for like 5 seconds before he says something. And I've never been the biggest Newt Gingrich fan, right? But at the same time, you know, like it's good to hear. It was so good to hear from all sides, and then to give breath to certain answers, not just to Newt, but to other interviewees and stuff. Like she just inserts these moments of breath before an important statement is being made by someone that she really wants you to listen to, right? In some cases it was Newt, some cases it was Cory, some cases it was Kalief, or not Kalief, but it was Michelle, I guess. I'm not sure. But it just like the timing was so thought out and perfect. And I don't think that a lot of people think about that when it comes to documentaries. They just think like, I'm going to fill you in with this information, and then you're going to take it and you're going to do with it what you will. But it was amazing.
Yeah, and you know what? What's funny is Ava DuVernay was the first filmmaker I reached out to because I wanted to cover this with her, like on the show.
Yeah.
And at the time, she was in post for A Wrinkle in Time, and I'm assuming also prepping for When They See Us. And so her assistant was just like, she just does not have time.
Wait a minute, you got a response?
Yeah, I mean, not from Ava, but from her assistant. Yeah.
Hey, dude, that's you know.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, you're still shot down. You're like, oh, damn it.
Whatever. You're shot down by her assistant. That's pretty awesome.
I'll take it.
It's better than no answer.
But because this was such so like everything you just said, I mean, it's so incredibly well thought out. There are, you know, kind of two ways to make a documentary, I think. One of them being more of a Laura Poitras style, where you're a fly on the wall and you're gathering tons and tons of footage, and you figure out the story a little bit later. And there's also this style where everything's planned. It's to some degree scripted. Not that, you know, she's telling everyone in these interviews. There's no way she walked into Newt Gingrich his office and was like, yeah, I want you to say this and that. Like, no. But for the most part, through pre-interviews, you can start to have an idea of where someone stands and, ask the right questions so that you can make efficient use of everyone's time, because no one wants to sit for a 10-hour interview. And so if you know, hey, this person is an expert on meals in the criminal justice system, then I'm going to have them for an hour. We're going to discuss, what the food is like in prison, for example. And so just kind of having some level of outline, you can go into production with the storyboard that says we're going to spend 10 to 12 minutes on the civil rights movement, and then we're going to spend 5 to 7 minutes on Kalief Browder and blah blah blah. You can already map out what your documentary is going to be, and that way you can start gathering footage. If you have assistants, which I'm sure she did, they can already start gathering footage and understanding how it's going to fit into the context of the film, and that just gives you so much more opportunity to make a much more thoughtful and impactful movie, so that you're not wasting anyone's time on a number of levels, not just for the audience, but for your production as well, because this still costs money. You still need to make the most of every single dollar you get, especially for documentaries that make no money. Like, it's so much more important to have a game plan, and this is, for my dollar, and I've watched a lot of documentaries, this is the best documentary I've ever seen. And again, I've seen dozens and dozens and dozens. I sit and watch Frontline, and Frontline makes some incredible documentary pieces for sure. But this is, for my dollar, the cream of the crop.
And let's be clear, like, as of why it's not even, yes, the content is important, but it's not even the content. It's the way, it's the filmmaking style and the expertise at which the story is told that really hits you on a visceral level, whether you agree with it or not. Let's just be honest, because not everybody does, obviously. It's the filmmaking. Yeah,
absolutely. And one of the things that struck me really quickly about this film as I was watching it the very first time was the way she was framing up the interview subjects. I think she's doing something incredibly intentional here that just really spoke to my soul as a filmmaker, and obviously as a human being, kind of broke my heart. And so with that, let's talk a little bit about cinematography, because if you look at how she's framing people, it's different than you've seen in other documentaries. For instance, if we look at Angela Davis, who's a professor, she's framed in her wide shot, and she does 2 compositions with everybody. There's the frontal wide shot, and then there's the close-ups that are more profile. And in the wide frontal shots, she's establishing something very interesting and specific in these frames. And it's funny, Todd, I didn't write any notes for this episode. I forgot to. I just got enraptured with the movie. So everything I'm saying is just based on previous research and thoughts that I've been holding on to for the last 3 years.
Wow.
So, but looking at, for instance, Angela Davis, the way that she frames everybody in this, almost everybody in the frontal wide shots, is almost like she's making a visual commentary or a visual metaphor of the system in America, the system of race and how it impacts your place within the system. So if you look at how she frames, again, Angela Davis, she's centered in the middle at the bottom. And so if you were to slice this up into not even thirds, but let's say there's a top half and a bottom half, and then there's thirds, left, right, left, center, and the right, then Angela Davis would be occupying the bottom center of that. And so and a lot of the black people are framed this way, so that they're kind of demoted in the frame, in the system. And it's further, enforced through the locations that she shoots. All the locations have an architectural feel to them, which is reflecting the architecture of America, of the racial inequality and architecture that we've built into our system. So there's this very subtle visual style that's calling to a metaphor of, in America, there is a system, there is an architecture to the way that our country is run. And within that system, black people occupy a very low space. And it's right there in the visuals. And so if you remember the Hitchcock rule, the bigger something is in the frame, the more important it is. And so using that rule, that same idea, these people are being framed so that their impact on the frame is much smaller. because that is their stature in the system as it is. And you'll see this occurring throughout. Like, it's not every single person, and that may have more to do with time and location, but certainly for all the main players, like Angela Davis, like even my favorite one, and this is really beautiful, is Michelle Alexander, because if you look at hers, and I'm pulling it up just so I can look at it right now. Hers is still occupying like the bottom half of the frame, and she's in the middle. She's demoted in a visual sense, but she's also set up in this, like, it's obviously some kind of college or something. But if you look at the frame, there's a window in the back, and there's these two huge pillars that are going. She's in this red chair. And while on the one hand, she is smaller in the frame, she's also framed above the horizon line. So her head is above the horizon line. And usually that means you're on top of the world. Like, the world isn't crushing you. Instead, you're above it all. And so there's a lot of interesting things happening here, because those pillars and her seating and the general visual of it gives you also this feeling that she's a queen. She's royalty. Like, she runs this piece, because Michelle Alexander, if you don't know, wrote this book called The New Jim Crow, which is an incredible book. And it contains just gobs and gobs of research. I want to say she spent over 10 years researching all the stuff that she puts in that book. And so it's all coming from a very well-grounded background and well-researched background. And so she is, of everyone in this film, she is the most knowledgeable about what's being discussed. She is the center of information. I would be shocked if Michelle Alexander wasn't, right next to Ava throughout the filmmaking and production, just to help advise and give her insights into what is happening and who are the best people to talk to. And Michelle Alexander would be the queen bee in that hierarchy for sure. And so it makes sense, if you're going to frame her up and give her a background, to make her feel like royalty, because on the one hand, yes, her place, from a racial standpoint, is still lower than some of the white people that they framed, and we'll get to that in a second. But she still also has a big place in this discussion. And so it's just one of the most beautiful frames I've ever seen, with all the nuance that goes into that. And so, yeah, that you're going to see that time and time again through a lot of and I'll put some stills on the website so that you can go look at the show notes at thepestlepodcast.com/13th, 13th. You can go to the site and you can look at some of these frames and see what I'm talking about. But if you jump into, like you were just talking about, Newt Gingrich, if you look at his frame, there's something else that's interesting and that's happening. He's big. He's huge in the frame.
Mm-hmm.
He occupies most of the frame of his frontal wide shot. And not only that, and this is something that I found really interesting, is that he's up against this white wall. Now, they lit it so that there's a really nice texture that's happening to the wall. And he's sitting right next to a window, so you have all this natural, beautiful window light. But the background is opaque. There's no transparency. Like, if you go back and look at Michelle Alexander's frame, you can see straight through the window. You can see stuff outside. Whereas Newt Gingrich, there is no transparency there. And I think that's speaking to his role as a Republican, as a conservative, and as someone who was taking part in these things that are discussed in the films in the 90s. And he's such a weasel, man. I personally can't stand him because he's a great politician. And for that, I hate him because he's going to sit on camera and say all the right things because he knows his audience. He knows who's going to be watching this. And at the same time, he's going to distance himself from any responsibility and any culpability about what's going on. He was a lawmaker. He had a lot of influence.
Yeah, he was there.
Yeah, he was a House Speaker in the 90s. So let's not, minimize his damage and his role in everything. And so whenever I see people like that start to, try to do their best to say all the right things and deny their role in the system, it's frustrating. And I mean, I guess to some, evil degree, kudos to him for being a snake in the oil. Like, it's pretty gross. And you can see this through, with a lot of the other white people. I would say the exceptions concerning white people are anyone who's been through the system, who's been through prison. They get framed a little bit differently. They're still occupying a little bit more higher in the frame. They're still but they are still smaller, and they're usually occupying like the edge. And so if you watch this film with those thoughts about who is this person, what do they mean in the context of what's being discussed, you'll get a lot of insights. But the other interesting thing, and this goes into, this might confuse you, because if you watch this and you're like, well, Cory Booker and Charlie Rangel wasn't framed that way. And that's even more interesting, because if you consider about, again, the architecture of America, they're politicians. Booker is a senator. He has powers. So, of course, he's going to be bigger in the frame. He's going to have more influence on what's taking place and what's happening. And before that, I want to say he was mayor of Newark. And similar with Rangel, he was a mayor during, all the worst parts of, the three-strike system and all the stuff that was happening. And so what's really interesting about the Rangel framing and composition is if you look at his frame, it's almost pitch black behind him. Like you see him, you see a little bit of his chair, and then nothing but pitch black. And so there's a comment being made about, who he is. He's going to be doing the same thing Newt Gingrich is, right? Kind of shedding any culpability. But whenever you see the frame, you start to feel like this isn't a good guy. Like, fine, he's black and he's supposed to be on the side of understanding what's right and wrong in this situation. But clearly he's not. And so he's framed a little bit like a bad guy. And I'd be curious. I don't expect Ava, I guess, to comment on something like this, because it's probably already difficult getting these people. But if they knew they were kind of being visually set up to be the bad guy on screen in a sense, then, that would probably be less good. But what I also really like about these scenes, still talking about cinematography, the profile shots kind of level the playing field. And I don't know how much of that was just for the sake of coverage. You don't want it to be too wide, because then it starts to feel jumpy if you're cutting from a wide shot to another wide shot. But I assume that has more to do with just coverage, because if you have multiple angles of someone, then you can more tightly edit and make better use of their dialogue, so that if they're stuttering, or maybe they go off on a tangent that has nothing to do with the point and they come back to the point, then you can kind of cut out the stuff that doesn't need to be there. It's not helping tell the story. It's not there for anything other than maybe they just had a brain fart, so to speak. And so
the second camera, or third, or however many they had on them, I noticed was moving a lot. Not always, but in some cases it was moving. And I wonder if you think that was obviously it was a conscious decision, but like why, with some interviewees it was moving, but with like Cory Booker, I don't think it was. It was just kind of like more of a profile shot. But I think with like the older gentleman, I forget his name, at the very beginning, who's framed tiny in the corner, the bottom right corner. They had like a moving B cam on him.
That's a good question. I don't really have an honest take on it. I mean, that would be interesting to analyze from a standpoint of are the lawmakers, static, as opposed to someone like Michelle Alexander, who's has more movement, and then maybe you're speaking to where progress can actually come from. Through movement, or maybe it was just visual interest and opportunity. Maybe certain locations, were easier to do these setups and make more visually interesting than others.
Okay.
Yeah. So that would be an interesting way to go through the film for sure. But the one of the cool things about these profile shots is they often. There is only I'm pretty sure there's only a 2-camera setup with almost everybody. Maybe a few of these had a 3, but for the most part 2. And they would make it look like there were 3 just by virtue of flipping the image. So if you're on a profile, they might intercut that with the same camera, but they literally invert the image to make it feel like you just jump to the other side of them. Like if you're looking through Newt Gingrich's pictures, if you don't know better, you might think he was sitting in between 2 big windows.
I just thought that. Yes. Yes.
But he's not. He's not. They're just literally flipping the image, which is doing a lot of things. To some degree, you might be making a joke or a commentary about the nature of politicians flipping back and forth on the issues. Or you also, and to some degree, depending on the edit, it might look like you can have them arguing against themselves. Like if they say one thing right and then you invert the image, and you were to kind of layer that, it's like they're looking at themselves. And so that could be in there. I'm not saying it is, but that certainly could be. But if nothing else, it makes it feel like the room is bigger, or that you have more opportunity for editing and keeping more visual interest. And so if, for instance, you don't want to come back to the wide, inverting the image might let you tighten up the dialogue a little bit without ever actually having to sacrifice anything visually interesting. And
so cool.
Yeah, it's like genius stuff.
But keep in mind, like, that doesn't always work.
Right.
Right. It's got to be motivated.
It's got to be motivated, and you got to make sure, like, if he had been wearing a T-shirt with dialogue on it, then suddenly the words are backwards. You're going to know what's happening.
I just can't picture Newt Gingrich in a T-shirt at all, much less with any kind of words on it. He only wears suits, right? Doesn't he sleep in them?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Silk suits that he sleeps in.
Yeah.
And so there's just so much brilliant stuff that's going on from a filmmaking standpoint. And we can jump into the dialogue or the editing. But I think you said it pretty well. Like, the pacing is so spot on. There's a lot of slow pacing between the interview subjects. There's space between their statements to help let the dialogue set in. Even in the beginning, right, we heard the scene from the reporter or the news anchor talking about Kalief Browder, and then a bit of a space, and then someone else kind of comments, and then a little space, and then they start diving in. Like, they're giving you a moment to digest what we're about to discuss, and then we're going to go for it. And so it's really great. They do some really great transitional moments, right, where the audio kind of creeps in and builds into these key moments, and gives the story some momentum. And I feel like could be, and this is again me kind of throwing stuff out, on the wall. But whenever they're looking at some of the older clips, there's some really amazing stuff that they're doing with, like, the old footage is in this very tight square, and you're watching like JFK or LBJ kind of discuss race in America, and I can't help but wonder if when they cut from that to something like the riots, which are in full widescreen, maybe they're kind of giving you this visceral impression of the way race in America is presented versus the reality. Like, it's presented in a very narrow context, but in reality, it's so much more worse than what you're seeing on TV. And so maybe there's some subtle commentary being inserted through just the way they're presenting historical archival footage. And so those are just a lot of things to think about as you're watching this. But I know we're running short on time, so maybe we can jump real quick into some stories, unless there's anything else you want to cover.
No, I would love to.
Cool. So I reached out to some friends, and I'll talk about this here in a second, but I just wanted to hear some stories about people and my friends and their encounters with police. And so this one is from my buddy Shamari. It's about 7 minutes long. And yeah, dive in. Hopefully you can hear this pretty good, Todd.
Hey, what's up, Wes? So I got two short stories to share with you about encounters with police. One is like a 1 or 2 on a scale of 1 to 5, and one is probably like a 4 on a scale of 1 to 5, if I had to put all of my encounters on a scale. All right, so the first one in high school, sophomore, so I was probably like 15, maybe 16, I don't remember. And there was an incident that happened at school. It was an emergency, so they said, okay, we're going to send everybody home. And so mind you, this is in the morning. This is before lunchtime. So now we have a lot of free time on our hands that we normally wouldn't have. And me and a few friends said, okay, we're going to go to our rival high school and hang out with them, because it was almost lunchtime and they'd be getting out for lunch. And when I say rival, I don't mean like bad blood like on TV. Like, it's just another high school in the neighborhood. We all got along. We were all fine. So we're heading over there. My man who owns the car is driving, is Mexican. It's myself, and another one of my friends who's black, and another one of our boys who was white. So it's four of us in the car, and we're headed down there to the other side of town, and we hear the dreaded whoop, whoop.
Okay, and I'll let him continue here in a second, but I just want to make sure everyone's following. So what's happened at this point is Shamari's like 15 or so, and school got let out because of some emergency at the school, and so all his buddies are like, "Oh, we have a free day." I mean, it was like 10 a.m. So they're like, "Let's go hang out. Maybe let's go to the store." So at this point, they're on their way to the store. There's four of them in the car, and he's just saying that they're being pulled over by police.
All of us simultaneously. Shit. So pull over. We had an idea of why they pulled us over, which was that we weren't in school, but it was around lunchtime and our campus was open, so we could have been going to lunch. So we still were like, why are they pulling us over? But anyway, pull us over, walk up to the car. First question, how come you're not in school? And we were like, well, there was an incident, emergency at the school, and they sent us all home. Now, mind you, this emergency required police presence. There was probably about 10 to 15 police officers. Like, it was a big ordeal. Like, it was a situation. So even if they weren't there, I'm sure they would have heard of it over the radios, or this wasn't a quiet thing. But anyway, they go back to the car, and they're probably back there for about 20, 30 minutes while we're sitting in the car. 20, 30 minutes pass, they come to the car and they say, hey, your story checks out. Your story checks out. There was an incident at the high school. We all breathe a sigh of relief. We're like, all right, great. We about to be on our way. He had a follow-up question. Another question you never want to hear when pulled over. Whose car is this? Again, a sigh of relief was gone just that quickly. My man who was driving was like, oh, this is my car. And he said, officer said, okay, I need to see your license and registration. Takes the license and registration, looks at it, looks at him, looks at it, looks at him again, and says, well, why is your name not on the registration? He's like, oh, that's my mom's name. She bought the car, because I'm in high school. Now, mind you, him and his mom have the same last name. I know that's not always the case, but him and his mom have the same last name. And to add to it, not to stray too far from the story, they have a Spanish last name that I have never heard. It is very uncommon. I've never heard that last name. We grew up in a neighborhood that's like 80% Latino, and he's the only one that I know with that last name, him and his sisters.
Yeah, and I want to just iterate on that because I know the guy he's talking about. I was lucky enough to be one of Shamari's groomsmen in his wedding a few months ago. And I met this guy, childhood friend, buddy. Obviously, they're still friends. And I've never heard this last name before either in my entire life. It would be like, how many Sapios have you ever met in your life, Todd? Just none. Like, I've met more Heidenreichs than I've met, Sapios. And it's to that point where it would be like a Sapio, like, oh yeah, I guess that's a name, but I've never heard that name before. And so if someone were to pull me over and say, whose car is this? And I'm like, well, it's mine. It's in my mom's name. And they pulled out my license and said, yeah, your last name is Heidenreich. The car is registered to a Heidenreich. That tracks. Like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And obviously they didn't have that reaction, which is, beyond absurd. So anyway, here we go.
But anyway. So they take the license and registration after asking him why the names don't match, and they go back to the car. Now it's another 15, 20 minutes. They come back to the car, and they said, we're going to need you all to step out of the car. I'm like, oh, great. Here we go. We get out the car. They handcuff my man who was driving, and they also handcuff the white guy. And then they made myself and my other friend put our hands on the hood. This was Texas, and it doesn't matter when. It was Texas. The hood was hot as hell. So, it took us about 15 minutes of pleading with them. Can we just take our hands off the hood? We're not going anywhere. We're not going anywhere. So we're sitting out there. We're in the grocery store parking lot where they pulled us over. To add insult to injury, the high school that we came to hang out with was let out for lunch. And so everybody can see us sitting there being detained by the police. I think all in all, from pulling over to finally letting us go, probably like 90 minutes. There was no explanation for even why we were pulled over, why we were detained, why the driver was handcuffed. The white guy, actually, they took him. He had a warrant, so they took him. But that's neither here nor there. But there was really no explanation as to why we were even pulled over in the first place. And that might not sound like a big deal, but I can give you 10 more stories like that, where after the whole thing, we're still wondering, don't wonder why that pullover happened. But anyway, so that's the first one. The second one, I went to UT. I would often take that 8-hour drive back to EP, and having done that drive many times over the course of 4 years, I knew what towns not to stop and get gas in. Shoot, I knew what towns not to even be caught speeding in, because if anybody knows Texas, you just know. So one day coming back, I can't remember what year it is. I want to say it was my freshman year. I was coming back and I stopped. I had miscalculated my mileage and my gas, and I had to stop in a place that I know that was normally on my do not stop list. I wasn't too worried about it, but I was like, because I'd rather have gas than be stranded. So pull over, step out of the car. As soon as I step out of the car, turn to my left, and there's a gun pointed at me by a police officer. He's yelling, "Didn't you hear me? Didn't you hear my sirens?" Now, to keep it 100, I at the time had two 12-inch Rockford 5-gate subwoofers, and I am sure that they were at full capacity going down I-10. I am sure of that. So it's very possible that he had his sirens on and I didn't hear. But I wasn't speeding, so it wasn't like I was trying to get away, and I pulled calmly into a gas station, which means I was probably going to get gas. I think what's funny about that, when I think about that situation, is I don't even remember what happened. I don't remember if I got a ticket. I don't remember the conversation that we had. I feel like I remember having to go and mail something out to that county that I got stopped in, but I cannot tell you the outcome of it. All I can tell you is that I thought that was it for me, and I was scared shitless. That's the only two things that stick out in that time. So yeah, those are two small interactions I've had with police in my time.
Yeah, and believe me, if Shamari is saying he's got 10 more, he's probably underestimating. I've known him for 20 years now, and so these are two new stories. I hadn't even heard these stories before, and so for him, and I've heard him other stories. He's not exaggerating whatsoever. But I'll jump into the other ones. Two more stories from my buddy Gerald, and then we'll get to some interesting conversation. And so the first one, Gerald is talking to the group. I'm on this group thread. It's the only group thread that I'm really on with 6 of my buddies. I'm the only white person on this thread, but we all kind of knew each other through college. I did not go to college. They all did, so I'm the uneducated one of this group of people. And so I asked them, like, hey, y'all have any stories y'all want to share for the podcast? And Gerald was like, hey, do y'all remember when we were hooping at Madison and the cops tried to make us leave? Madison is an apartment complex because there were complaints about us being loud, and they knew, quote unquote, they knew we didn't live there, but they did live there. Meanwhile, it was Friday night and frat parties were allowed up and down West Campus. It just didn't make sense for black dudes to be hooping at a private apartment complex. And Gerald says, I still remember that cop yelling, saying, do you know the law better than I do? Like, what does that have to do with people hooping at their own apartment complex? And that was a throwaway. He wasn't really even trying to share that story. But his next one will probably, make an impact. And I'm just going to read exactly what he wrote. And I'll try to keep my shit. This is Gerald. My other run-in was as an adult several years ago. My wife, Amelia, and I were moving out of our apartment to the new house we bought. Mind you, the old apartment was in off 360 Westlake area, White Heaven. Like this is a very rich part of town. This is maybe the wealthiest part of Austin, Texas, which is already, a pretty white city. Anyway, that was me talking. Gerald says, Amelia was at our house, his wife was at our house, and I told her I would go back to the apartment and grab the last couple of small boxes, clean up, and turn in the keys. No moving truck was required for this. I was at the apartment, taking things to the car and cleaning for an hour or so. At around 6 p.m. dusk, I hear a loud banging at my door. It was loud and aggressive, like I thought someone was going to jack me. I went to the door and looked through the peephole and saw nothing. So I shrugged it off, but decided to lock the door because it was unlocked the entire time I was cleaning. As soon as I locked the door to go back to cleaning, I hear the loud banging on my door again. I look through my peephole and see nothing again, but decide to ask who is it, thinking maybe someone is playing a joke on me. Then the person says, "It's police, open the door now." At this point, my heart is racing and confused. As I open the door, I see 4 cops, 2 on each side of my door, with guns drawn. They were purposely hiding from the peephole. They rushed my apartment and put me against the wall like it was a drug bust. My heart is racing and I'm confused as to what's going on. As I'm on the wall, they ask me what I'm doing. In my best white sounding voice, I told them I'm moving out and cleaning up the apartment before I turn in the keys. They asked if I was Gerald, which meaning they had already run the tags on my car outside. I said yes. They asked me for my driver's license. I told them it was in my wallet in the kitchen. They allowed me to get my wallet. One guy took my ID and went to his police car to run my ID, while the other 3 stayed with me, guns still out. A few minutes later, the cop comes back and says he's good, and the cops give me back my ID and they left. No apology, and their justification was that they responded to a call that a large black man was burglarizing an apartment. Quote unquote, "We're just doing our job." I was fuming angry, but I knew I couldn't express that or it could have cost me my life. It was a violating, scary, and and emasculating experience. Here I am, a college-educated, working in tech, Apple at the time, family man, being perceived as a criminal because of the color of my skin. Those types of experiences never leave you. And shape how I view officers and heighten the awareness of how others perceive you. I shouldn't have to show my resume to people to prove I'm not a threat or I belong. Sorry, G.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's okay. I want to let you get through that.
Here's the thing, and stick with me because it's going to sound weird until I get to my point. I know hundreds of black people, and I'm not saying that in a sense of my best friends are black. That's not where this is going.
But I think they are. Still.
That's true. But yeah. I know hundreds of black people. I grew up in a very mixed town. Like, it's a small town, less than 2,000 people, but a lot of black people, a lot of Mexican people, and yeah, a lot of white people. And then, so I grew up there, and then whenever I moved to Austin, which was weird. Austin is so incredibly white that I hated it for about a decade. But the church I went to at the time was also pretty diverse. Like, we had a lot of college students, black, white, Mexicans, still not a lot of Asians, but we do what we can. And so I say that because I have hundreds of black friends that I could reach out to and ask for stories. And you might think that, hey, you're just cherry picking some of the worst ones. I literally did not do that. I literally just asked a text thread of the people I talk to every single day of my life, of 6 other people who are all black, and again, they're all college educated. I'm the only one who's not, and all of them have a story about a run-in with the police, and half of them have had the cops draw their gun on them. I've never in my life had a gun drawn on me. I had another buddy that I reached out to. We couldn't schedule it, but he has a story in Houston where he, like Gerald, was just kind of going to his car to grab his headphones so that he could work out with his headphones on. And he got reported for stealing out of his own car. 4 cops show up, and it ended up costing them their badges, thankfully. But I've never in my life heard of anybody having a gun drawn on them by police that wasn't black, apparently. And I've never heard of anyone being reported from stealing from themselves. I've never had all my police interactions. I always knew before I talked to them why they pulled me over. There was never any guesswork for me. I've never had, and again, I grew up in, maybe not the nicest neighborhood in the world. And so I feel like if you were to start clumping people together, I would have had some of these experiences too. I'm not rich. I grew up with a wooden spoon in my mouth. I've had to work really hard for everything I earn. And yet I've never encountered anything like this. And I literally reached out to one small group of people, and I could have had more stories. They were the only 2 who wanted to share anything. Everyone had a story. And again, half of them, and we didn't even talk about the other story, which I'm not going to get into because, he didn't get back in time, but they've had guns drawn on them. Mm-hmm. That's outrageous. Yeah, Shamari, you should have been shitting yourself because I've never had a gun pointed at me.
And let's be clear here, because I think that with all the stuff that's going on around the country, in Austin, yes, but and everywhere, LA, Atlanta, Florida, Minneapolis, New York, a couple of things. One, this is not something that because some cops killed one black guy, now everybody's uprising. This is, from a white point of view, a white, entitled, in my own way, born racist point of view, still is something that has been ingrained into our society, and if you watch 13th, it explains it very well. This is not something that's just a one-off. This is not something that's just been kind of bubbling up a little bit every now and then when a cop kills a black guy, or when a cop kills anybody. Let's also be clear that this is not just, yes, it's about police brutality against black and colored, black and brown people, but it is also about power and what giving a badge to someone, a badge and a gun, does to that person. It changes them. And if we don't acknowledge the fact that happens, then we can't ever take any kind of action against the bad ones, because there are good ones. These things, and I've been to several of these protests. Yes, they're mad, and these people are screaming F the police, and I don't scream that. I don't say anything really. I'm there as in solidarity, but the point is that it is not just about that, and it is something that has been hundreds of years in the making. Right? If you look at any of the stuff, the beginning and the end of 13th should rock you to your fucking core. As a human being, I don't care if you're white, black, Latino, Asian, it doesn't matter. If you're a human being, you should be weeping openly when you watch that. And it has only progressed. It is not, everyone thinks racism is less than it was just because black people can vote, and just because they one guy might get a job over me even because of the color of his skin. That does not mean equity, right? It does not mean equality, which there is a difference. And I just noticed recently that I haven't even noticed the difference between equality and equity. Equality could mean we both have 2 apples. But if I had just taken a bite of your apple, and given it to you, you still have 2 apples, but I have 2 apples and a bite. And that's the difference between equality and equity. And until we see the bite of the apple as white people, and I'm just going to single out white people in general, until we see that there is a bite taken out of their apple, that we have a lead in this race, that from the moment I was born, I was better off because of this system that has been implemented from the time that slavery was abolished up until now, and progressed due to politicians, due to capitalism in general, due to the industrial prison complex. Until we can see that and address it and actually do something about it, this is never going to change. And so I don't have a problem with protesting. Yes, I don't like violence of any kind, right, at all. But when I hear stories like that, right, or I see things happen on the streets in Austin that are fucking brutal, man, brutal, to innocent people standing there with signs doing nothing, just standing there. And I'm not even talking about on I-35, which was bad enough, and I posted a video about that. I'm talking about like in just normal streets by the cops. It is unbelievable. And then after a week of all of this, you see good cops like Acevedo in Houston, who used to be our chief of police here, stand up and talk to people and say, I know you're angry. I know, but I want to tell you that I'm going to walk with you. And they stand up and they talk instead of shooting tear gas, instead of having fucking riot gear, instead of like, the city giving them millions of dollars for all of this shit they don't need to police laws that should not be enforceable.
And just to jump in here, because yeah, I completely agree. We do need people like Art Acevedo and police chiefs, and there's videos that make the round and photos that are making the rounds of some cops kneeling and standing in solidarity, joining the protest, calling on God and religion. We definitely need those things in the sense of other cops need to see the sympathizing from the police force itself. They need to feel comfortable in saying, yeah, it's okay. We're not betraying whatever our brotherhood or whatever bullshit makes you feel justified in the crimes that are committed. But what I also want to see in addition to that, that's a great place to start. But to me, it's going to ring absolutely hollow if they're not also in favor of reform. To me, it'll just come across as appeasing. Like you're just trying to mellow the crowd out so that you can get through the day. You're not actually trying to change anything. And I just don't care anymore about police, having sensitivity training or spending just more time in the community. That's great. You've had 50 years to do that shit. You know what? Now it's time to have actual legal reforms, and I can go through a whole lot of reforms.
Which, by the way, is not going to happen. Especially here in Austin, they had that emergency city council meeting the other day. They sat there and listened to the whole thing with Jenny. They listened to 300 people. 300 people complain about the abuse of the APD against them. And then they vote for $450,000 to be given to the APD for some kind of car theft bullshit. And the point is, and the whole defund the police thing, you have people that are against that because like, oh, you need to police. They are a militia. They are a fucking army. Excuse my French. I know I've said it 10 times, the word, but they are an army, and they are armed with money and guns and riot gear against their own citizens
and immunity.
It is ridiculous. So in community. So when you talk about
and immunity.
Thank you. So when you talk, yes, exactly. So when you talk about defund the police, we're not saying like they have to work for free. We are saying stop giving them multiple of millions of dollars for the only reason they have so much money is not to pay them more money. Right? You ask a normal cop what they get paid, and it's less than what I get paid. And yet they put their lives on the line, right? They if they pull over anybody, it could be their last time they pull people over. I am not diminishing the danger, of a police officer. But at the same time, you choose that. That's what you choose. Just like a soldier chooses to go to war. Like, and I am such a supporter of that, of our soldiers. That has nothing to do with anything. The point is that they know what they're going into. And so do police officers. So when you say defund the police, it's like, stop giving them weapons of mass destruction and start arming them with knowledge and
what's crazy is that
kindness.
Soldiers, since you bring them up, like, they seem to have much better safety and protocols in place in a war zone. Like, their use of violence and their use of arms seems to be much more evenly paced, even despite working out of a war zone.
Very good point.
And yet we can't, convince, the vast all these cops that, hey, maybe you shouldn't, go to your gun quite as quickly. Like, the danger should already be imminent, I think, before you reach for your weapon. Because escalation only creates more escalation. You need to be practiced in de-escalating. And that should be your intention going into every situation. And what strikes me about, for one, just to go back to what you were talking about with the Austin PD, that it's so weird that you're at a protest against police brutality and your response to that is to create brutality from the police. The police started inciting violence. There's a great article. I'll link it. I haven't read it all, so forgive me. But there's an article from 538, who is famous for statistics and data analysis, and they're talking about the difference that de-escalation keeps protesters and police safer. And here's why. Police departments end up using force anyway. So something like half the time that protests turn violent, turn into riots, it's because police are using tactics that incite it. And that's something that's absolutely mind-boggling. Especially when you place on top of that, oh, these people are here to protest us being violent. Well, let's show them. Let's be violent. Like, if there was ever one moment for you to be like, yeah, let's take a chill pill, it would be to prove them wrong. And instead, you just immediately prove them right in order to keep your ego fed. And I think that's all that is. That's a total ego thing. And I'll link some other articles. I mean, there's this awful story about APD hitting a guy in the head, a young man. I think he's 15 or 16. And
yes. He's messed up forever.
Super messed up. And the medic, there was a medic who happened to be there in the crowd who was trying to help him, and they were like, hey, this guy needs medical attention. Y'all come over here and help us. And the officers would not lift a finger. They said, you're going to have to bring him over to us. And so they did. They start bringing him over. The medic gets shot while trying to help this guy, while trying to follow the orders that the officers had given him. He gets shot. Looks like it breaks some fingers in his hand.
Oh my God.
And I'll link to that as well, so that, you don't just think I'm fabricating, awful stories. There's more. I mean, unfortunately there's more, and it's absolutely, outrageous. But what strikes me about some of the other stories we've heard from, Shamari and Gerald and, all the stories, these are very mundane activities. The idea that you're driving and you get out to get some gas, and suddenly, there's a gun on you. You're trying to move out of your apartment. You're trying to grab something out of your car, and suddenly there are guns on you. It's not the crazy people die every day stories that, make the media. It's because those are just a microcosm of all the other stuff. You're looking at the tip of the iceberg, and that's why protests and riots break out, is because, everyone in that community is experiencing this stuff. And whenever you see someone finally, paid the ultimate price for it, why wouldn't that enrage you? It's absolutely outrageous, of course. Meanwhile, cops are, some people might be asking, why are we focusing on only when cops mess up instead of how they generally get it right? Well, I find that just kind of ironic from the standpoint that much like when a cop pulls you over for speeding, he's not going to bring up all the times you obeyed the speed limit. Like, of course, we're going to point out the times whenever you're screwing up the most, because that's the stuff that needs policing. That's the stuff that's out of bounds. So naturally, we want to call attention to that. I don't really care if a cop is doing his job right, 90% of the time. We need to get that to 100% of the time. And maybe policing just isn't for everybody. Like, I think one of the things, if, I'm going to run through a bunch of reform ideas. You can agree, disagree. I don't really care. I think the overarching problem is we need fewer encounters in general with the police. I find it funny that everyone's talking about defund the police, not because I disagree, but because the libertarian in me is like, yeah, I know all kinds of other ways that we could run the police department. Like, this is awesome. I've never thought society would come to this.
Anybody want to ask me my opinion?
Yeah. And so I love that idea. I love that there's, thought going into how can we make fewer interactions with police, because apparently most city budgets go to the police, which is ironic because I feel like most of what the police does is raise revenue. That's mostly what they're doing.
Yes,
they're out there just trying to raise money and fines and tickets. I've never had my car break in where the cop was there catching the guy. Like, I've never heard of anybody, having too many difficult problems that needed police and the police were there already. I feel like everything that they do is more geared towards being modern day tax collectors. And so certainly fewer interactions with police would also mean that we need fewer laws on the books. And I'll get to that in 1 second. But I think the first thing, and there's already some movement in the House, to remove qualified immunity. Cops should have no special privileges without an arrest warrant or probable cause or immediate imminent danger. And there's, to me, and this goes back to my political philosophy, my worldview, is that there is no difference between a cop and you. They're not special. It's not like they put on a badge and suddenly they're not human anymore. They're still just people. They're capable of mistakes, and it kind of confounds me whenever I see so many conservatives sticking up for cops or whoever, and yet you're supposed to be the people of small government, of less government is better. And yet you have no problem with the government being capable of taking your life. If you're someone who believes in like the militia and the Second Amendment, who do you think you're going to be using that against?
Exactly. Thank you. Oh my God. Thank you.
Like those are the people you're going to be fighting.
Yeah, they're not. It's not going to look like they're sending tanks down your street. It's like your local PD is going to come and take your rights away. Yes, exactly.
They're going to regulate. We also need, for reform, like independent reviews of all fatal incidents from a cop. Maybe it needs to be in a separate county or maybe a separate state. I don't really know the framework that makes the most sense, but I think that's obvious. You can't have a district attorney who is beholden to his own department, making those calls. That just shouldn't be the case. Obviously, we need more de-escalation training and laws against violent tactics for nonviolent charges. George Floyd was accused of using a counterfeit $20 bill. And that's a reason to break out your gun or to put him on the ground and treat him violently? No, that's assault. In any other place in America, if one private citizen does that to another private citizen, that we just call that assault. That's a reason to be thrown in jail. And I don't think cops deserve to have any special treatment in that regard. And I know I'll be on the fringe on that, but I just don't see any special case.
I'm there with you.
You're just people. You're just other people. And
because if you, I totally agree. And if you give them the assumed immunity there, then they are more likely to do something that could be overarching above there. Yeah, exactly. Whereas if they know I am beholden to the same exact laws and punishments as anybody else who might be carrying a firearm, then they're going to act differently. They might, not draw their firearm when they don't need to. And you have dissenters on the other side that would say, yes, but if they're not ready to draw their firearm, they could lose their life. And the only thing I can say to that is that I hope that would never, I hope that doesn't happen, but it is, they know what they know what they're walking into.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. You signed up for this. Don't be surprised that there's potential danger. Like that's the reason why you're supposed to be respected, is because you signed up for danger.
I would rather pay police a larger salary and give them less money in riot gear and firearm stuff. And seriously, okay, so let's get this straight. It is a dangerous job to be a police officer. I 100% get that, and I respect it. So why don't we pay you accordingly, right? I mean, I'm all for, a police officer who makes $55,000 a year. Give him $80,000. Instead, instead of like giving the entire department $2 million in like all of this riot gear bullshit, like that they shouldn't be using against their citizens anyway. You know, in that case, then maybe it's more worth it for me to be a police officer, right? Because of the salary. And I'm assuming that they would want more money anyway.
Yeah.
So, and if they're going to be carrying a gun anyway, what is the point in over arming them?
Absolutely. No, the fact that you have so much power definitely means that you should be held to higher accountability. Like you wouldn't expect, a private citizen who owns a gun, who breaks it out and uses it, to not have some level of accountability on their actions. And that's all a police is another human being with a gun.
Good point.
And so, this starts deviating slightly, but I think it adds up to a bigger picture. I don't think cops should be allowed to lie to citizens. I don't understand why that's okay. I don't understand why you can sit in an interview with a cop where you're being accused of something and they get to lie and say, yeah, your buddy's already ratted you out, or yeah, we have evidence. We got your fingerprints on the gun, or whatever it is. Like, I don't think cops should be allowed to lie to you. The only exception would be undercover, and you should be, sworn in to, with some judge's permission. It should be that hard. But in a second, I'll think you'll begin to realize that we probably don't even need undercover cops in all likelihood, and I'll get to that in a second. But cops should also tell us what our rights are. This is one of the most frustrating things about police and legal encounters, is we shouldn't need to be lawyers to understand and exercise our rights. There are too many laws to be reasonably expected to know them all. Anytime you get pulled over, you don't really have a clear understanding of what you can and cannot, disagree with. And cops go in knowing that. They know that they have this power over you of the confusion that you're in right now, and they do everything they can to wield it like a baseball bat. And it's really unfortunate. So we need to demystify what's happening in all interactions. This is why I pulled you over. Here's what I would like to do, etc. Here's what your rights are. You can refuse this, whatever. And so the mystery or unclear interactions with authority, it creates tension. Whereas predictability eases tension for everyone. If you know exactly what's going to happen when you get pulled over, that'll ease your mind a little bit, and it should ease the cop's mind a little bit, for everyone to be on the same page about exactly how this interaction is going to go. And right now, that's just not the case. You very rarely, like Shamari said, that he didn't know why he got pulled over, him and his friends. Like, they never got a clear answer. He assumed it was probably because they were out of school. But again, it was pretty close to lunchtime, so it wouldn't be unusual to have kids out there. And they held him for an hour and a half. That seems aggressive in a number of ways. The DA has too much power. Like the district attorney, they just have way too much power. And if you go read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, she goes into some really great insights about that whole process. It's outrageous. If you read that, you will be floored at the amount of power the DA has. And for one thing, there's too much overcharging, right? The cops, whenever they want to get you for one thing, they'll trump up 4 other, slightly different but similar things, and sometimes they'll fabricate things just to get leverage against you. So I think overcharging like that should be severely discouraged. There should be some punitive action whenever, and for that we probably need some kind of, again, independent review. But that just seems like a really bad abuse of power in order to get convictions and to keep people out of court. As the clip we played, if everyone actually went to court, the system would absolutely break. And I think, another big reform is we need to end the federal war on drugs and probably the DEA. We just need fewer law enforcement reasons to suspect and go on someone. And by that token, hopefully that also means that the states will begin decriminalizing and legalizing all these things. And
why is that a good thing? Can you clarify just in a minute?
Yeah, I would say, for one, what someone does with their own body is their business. I don't think that anyone should be forced to do, what they don't want to do, whether that's, yes, and I do mean all the drugs like meth, heroin, whatever. Because for one, it just creates a black market that creates less safety for people in general. You're going to see more overdosing. You're going to see more, dirty needles and infections. And so on a health reason, there's a lot of negative outcomes. But then on top of that, there's also a lot of violence in black markets. If you think back to Prohibition, right, Al Capone and Lucky Luciano, there was so much violence that as soon as Prohibition ended, it all went away. And so if you're concerned about violence and all the aggression that surrounds that, the blood count, then you should be in favor of legalizing drugs and allowing people to make their own choice. And in that way, you can also get them help. People, who get hooked on drugs are now no longer afraid to go out and get help because it's not going to land them in legal trouble. And
can you imagine can you imagine the amount of money by taxing that the government could make by taxing meth, by taxing cocaine, by taxing crack or whatever it is, and you as a consumer could have legal recourse if something is not,
it's bad
pure,
product,
and you get sick or a family member dies, you can have legal recourse. So you're not just going to have the mom and pops going into something like this. This is like something where like only if you're sure this stuff is pure, you're going to sell it, because you could get sued easily.
100%. And so just that alone would ease a lot of our prison population, and we could start phasing them out. Anyone who's nonviolent should get expunged and released. And so
just so many.
And it removes a lot of the facade, a lot of the pretense for why a lot of people in black communities are pulled over and engaging with law enforcement in the first place. They use that, pretty often as an excuse for interacting in the first place. And so it would help ease a lot of the needless interactions. And it's cheaper. I mean, there's so much money that's spent on that war that you can't win. This isn't a war that could ever actually be won. And there's just so much more damage coming out because of it. So we could literally sit here for an hour and discuss the war on drugs and all the ways it's been a failure. And I would never have to reference a single note. Like it's atrocious. And so we also should probably look at reducing and removing laws that are victimless crimes, stuff like prostitution, drugs, gambling, etc. There's just so many reasons that are created. I had a buddy who I grew up with who died in a no-knock raid. Like, we need to end no-knock warrants because he broke into they raided a house that he believed was hosting a drug dealer, and the guy was confused. He didn't know what was going on, and so he hears someone break into his house. He opens up fire. My buddy gets hit, and he ends up dying. And it's heartbreaking because he was a good dude. I would absolutely stand in front of anybody and say this was a good person. He wasn't like this power-hungry guy. He was just a really good heart, and he had, I believe, totally in my heart, he had all the right intentions of trying to protect my community and trying to do something healthy for everybody. But ultimately, it was just not the right thing to do. It was the wrong call, and it breaks my heart. It cost him his life, and I'm heartbroken for his brothers and his family and his cousins. I know his entire family, and it's absolutely painful that stuff happens. And there's other kinds of those incidents that happened. There was, I want to say in New Mexico, maybe Arizona, where there was a no-knock raid. They went to the wrong house. A baby got blinded by a flashbang. Like, this stuff happens all the time for no reason. For what? Because you don't want someone getting high? Whatever. Anyway.
And this might sound like, listen, you and I, we've talked about this kind of stuff for years. So I'm, you're saying this and I'm not like, whoa, this is the first time I've ever heard this. Right. So this might be like the first time someone has ever, and there's drama going on outside my door, whatever, might be hearing this. This might be the first time, and it might be like, whoa, that can't be right. But keep in mind this quote unquote war against drugs. And if you watch 13th, you'll see where it started, and what it was before, and what it was like before, what the prison system was like before it, and then what it was like after. And you really just sit down and logically ask yourself, like what is the purpose of this? Is it really because is weed illegal because it's bad for me? Is my government the one that's supposed to decide what is bad for me? Because my government puts a lot of shit in my food, allows a lot of, not only allows, but tells the food companies, manufacturers, to put a lot of stuff in my food that I don't have any say over. so they're dictating what is good for me and what is not good for me. And so for all my conservative friends out there, really sit down and think, is this something that you believe in, or or do you really think that you should be more free? And this is a good example of that. And yes, people will overdose on drugs. Of course, they do now, but they do in a much more terrible way, alone in a gutter, instead of maybe in their house next to, like another loved one who's doing the same thing. Point is that they chose to do it, and they were free enough to do it, and they weren't going to, get go to jail for making a decision to put something in their own body. Sorry, sodomy is still illegal in like so many states. Like, you're going to regulate my bedroom? Really? Because you don't think why? Because that's not what God wants? Like, how do you know that? Like, it's just ridiculous. It's a whole nother rabbit hole.
It's absurd.
I will, yeah. Go ahead, you can finish.
Yeah. And so to Todd's point, like 13 makes a really great, case of why the drug war was started in the first place, how it's been used. And again, I'm going to keep going back to Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. There's a passage in there that just sticks with me. The drug use is very equal across races. It's not like black people do more drugs than white people. That's not what's happening. But because of the propaganda and because of the images in the media, everyone, whenever you start to, there was this test that they did where they were curious to say, what does a drug dealer look like? And everyone described a black man. Whereas you're very unlikely, if you're white and you live in a white community, to go get your drugs from someone in a completely different community. You're going to get the drugs from people within your own community. Mm-hmm. That's just how that works.
Yeah.
And so it's preposterous that, there's more minority drug dealers than white drug dealers. It's equal. It's just disproportionately targeted. And so I think if we end the war on drugs, we start to end one of the tactics used to disrupt and break the black community, because once you go to prison, as 13th illuminates, it starts to affect your ability to get work and find meaningful employment, and it just ruins your life, and it's not okay. And so police are modern day tax collectors and hall monitors. They shouldn't be worrying about drugs and whatever else. To some degree, even whether or not you're driving too fast. Their focus should really be on violent crimes, right? Assault, theft, that, and assisting emergencies. That should be where their focus is really at. And we can help make that, a focus by reducing the amount of laws that they're supposed to be enforcing. For instance, Eric Garner sold loose cigarettes and was killed for it. He was selling loose cigarettes, and that's the reason to break them up and choke them out. Like, that's absurd, and like I said a minute ago, prohibition just doesn't work. That was the reason why it ended in the first place. It's just not effective. And so, there's other things. I don't know, like maybe we should end police unions. I'm not a very big union person in general, but they seem particularly difficult and make it very, very hard in order to police the police who watches the watchman. And probably along those lines, we should end asset forfeiture and seizure. It seems like just this unconstitutional way to take people's private belongings. And if you're poor, if you don't have money and they take your car, or they take, they seize some of your assets, then you have no way to fight the system in the first place. Like Kalief Browder, being unable to pay his fine would have been so much more impacted if, the situations. I've seen stories of someone losing, they had cash for whatever reason, and the police seized it, $20,000, and I think they were like on their way to make a deposit, from the store, that kind of thing, and they just lost their ability to not only keep their business going, but to fight the charges that were leveled against them in the first place. But yeah, in general, we just need more police transparency and general oversight. I'm not a big regulation guy, but when it comes to the government, I'm definitely in favor of more regulations on the government, which is what the The Constitution is supposed to be, by the way, if you didn't know, you're right. You never actually made an oath to the Constitution. It's not supposed to be rules and regulations for citizens. It's rules and regulations for politicians and anybody who works for the government. That's why they pledge an oath to the Constitution. You and I never have. It's supposed to be a limitation and restrictions on their powers, and they're supposed to be beholden to it, not you and I. Anyway,
that's definitely not how it is now.
Not how it is right now, no. So yeah, those are some ideas. I don't know. There's probably 1,000 better ideas on how to reform and make the system better, but
I think those are a few good ones.
There's a few in there that might be everyone could, chew on and think about. But we've been going for a while. I don't know if you have any final thoughts before we get into recommendations for the week.
Yeah, I just have one final thought. One comment and then a final thought. When I went to that first protest here in Austin and we took over I-35, and I saw that violence against the protesters from the cops on the horses and trampling people and like shooting tear gas at my wife and or mace or whatever, it was disheartening. But then the worst thing was when I get home and I see all the comments from family and from who I thought were friends saying, get out of the fucking street. And it just broke my heart.
Can I ask you something? My impression was that the police are the ones who stopped traffic on I-35 because of the protests.
Yeah.
Is that accurate? So it wasn't like y'all went up and said, "Hey, we're gonna clog up traffic in order to
No.
It was them.
No, they stopped it moving south, and then we stopped it moving north, because they stopped it moving south.
Yeah.
Because people were, because there was not a whole lot of space between where the police station is and the kind of like the start of I-35. So there's so many people, we were sitting up against the wall of I-35. So they shut down it moving south. And then when they shut that down, we were like, fine. So they took over I-35 on the other side moving north. But that's not even the point.
Yeah, definitely.
We could have taken over the whole damn freeway, and it would. You know what? My tax dollars pay for that freeway, and I understand that people need to get to work and blah blah blah, and I get all of that stuff. Martin Luther King in Selma marched on the freeway. He took it over with thousands of others. Right? And what happened? He got the shit beat out of him. Right? But now you sit back and you look at history, and what do you think? You think, oh, he was right. And yet today, and let me point out, like, there were just as many white people as black people that were at that protest, right? And I get berated by people who I would expect to be, I don't know, like-minded maybe, because they're either, my friends that I've trained with or that I've known for years, or my family. And it was like completely eye-opening that, man, I have way too many friends. That was what opened my eyes. I was like, nope, you're gone. And I had a lot of people say, well, you don't want to shut those people out because then you can't have a civil discourse and blah, 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 blah. Those are people that are never going to see my side. Those are people that are never going to say, oh yeah, I agree with Black Lives Matter. I agree with defund the militia that is the police. I agree, they're not going to think that. So that hurt my heart. But the last thing I'll say is the stories that you told from your friends are heartbreaking. And in a few cases, you mentioned that someone called the cops. So I don't want to sit here and say that the cops are the problem, because you've got a ton of good cops. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb and say there are more good cops than bad cops. I'm just going to say it. How do I know? I don't even know. I know a few cops myself, and I think that they are good people. But you have people calling them, saying, someone's breaking into this apartment. What are they going to do? Of course they're going to come and assume someone's breaking into an apartment. So were they too physical? 100%. Absolutely. There is fault there. But there's also fault in the person that called in the first damn place. And that person is me and you. That person is not that I have, but that person is my family. That person is my friends. And until we have that conversation that is us, then that's never going to change, because cops' job is to respond to a phone call saying someone's breaking the law. So, I mean, look, again, we are two white guys talking about black problems, which is probably hilarious to all of our black friends that are listening right now. But, that's what we got to do, man. We got to talk about our whiteness. We got to talk about this kind of thing. Because if we stop talking about it, then it stops becoming an issue. And I don't want that to happen. I want that to keep going. I want this movement to keep going, and I want to see some change. I want somebody elected to office that has some balls, and I hope that it's a woman with no balls, or transsexual. I don't even care. It doesn't matter. Point is, someone who's not afraid to lose their seat because they tried to change something, right? And their constituents didn't like it. You got to do what is not popular to make some kind of change, or else nothing will change. And then what good are you as a politician? You're no good. The only reason you're elected is to change shit. That's it. You're not there to maintain the thing that's been the status quo for 100 years, or even for 5. Optimize. Change. It's 2020. Why are we still handling shit like we did in 1969? With horses and riot gear. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Find another way. Grow a pair and be a good politician. Do something. Okay, I'm done. So
no, I love it. And I would say, as my final parting thought, I guess, there is common ground. Let's say you don't believe that black people are disproportionately targeted. Let's say that's what you believe, and you're just not going to come around. You're going to find your own statistics that tell whatever story you want to tell. And fine, okay, I'll give you that. But I still think you can get behind the general concept that's being discussed here without ever having to fully sympathize with Black Lives Matter. There is common ground that we should find a universal truth, a principle to, that doesn't require you to somehow agree with something that you just in your heart cannot bring yourself to agree with. And that's, the use of violence. It shouldn't be this common. It shouldn't be that easy for a cop to engage in a violent act and not be held accountable. That's all we're really talking about at the end of the day, is the only way to discourage police from exercising violence is to, prosecute them, and is to make it easier for them to be prosecuted. And in that way, I think we're all in accordance. I mean, there's plenty of stories of white people, that have been assaulted and hurt by police.
Totally.
There's this heartbreaking story of like a major or a general's son, some high-ranking military soldier, officer, that his son was pulled over and killed by police, and they were never held accountable. Like, he was white. And so, yeah, to some degree, it is everybody. And if you can't get behind the idea that cops should be held accountable just as much or more than the average citizen, then, maybe you should chew on that and think about it and figure out why you believe that. Because maybe it has little to do with anything that's a principle. It has more to do with just some kind of fallacy, some long-held belief that you might want to reconsider and feel challenged on. And I think the mark of a brilliant mind isn't its ability to make a case or to make a point. It's the ability to change your mind on something that was once, a dear held position. So.
Yeah. Well said, man.
Thanks, man.
Sorry we got on soapbox here, but you knew we would. It just had to happen. So we'll wrap this up. Sorry, everybody, but not sorry.
Nice. What are you going to recommend this week?
There's so much that you could recommend, having, anything to do with Ava DuVernay or anything to do with, anything like 13th. But I'm going to recommend, just because it kind of raises this question of didn't he, does it matter, does it not matter, the system, etc. I'm going to recommend Serial from This American Life, the case on Adnan Syed. it was an incredible podcast that just had the world really engulfed in a podcast. It was like super famous all around the world. A podcast was, and I'm not talking about the Joe Rogan podcast. It's really amazing, really well written, really well produced, and fantastic. And it leaves you just your opinion on it. Did he do it? Did he not? Does it matter? Is really a huge factor in why it's so good. That's what I recommend. Serial.
Nicely done.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to recommend 3 things for the first time ever.
Oh my gosh.
One for each occasion. If you're looking for a new book to read, then by now this won't be a secret. I'm going to recommend The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. It's an absolutely incredible read for the amount of information. It's also an easy read. And so it's engaging. It's incredibly thoughtful. You don't have to agree with everything in there. If you disagree with, 10%, there's still 90% of stuff that's going to blow your mind. And there's like a few nitpicky things that I'm like, I don't know about that, but that's okay. That's the whole point, is the idea that you don't have to agree 100% with everybody on everything. But she's forgotten more than I'll ever learn. So go read The New Jim Crow. Also, if you want to dive more into Ava DuVernay, she has a show on Netflix called When They See Us. It's about the Central Park 5. If you've not seen that, and they
touch on it on 13th.
Yeah. It's absolutely heartrending. You won't be able to make it through that in one sitting. It's something that you wish you could binge, but your heart just cannot take the amount of injustice that happens in there. And then lastly, if you need a new podcast, I'll recommend 16 Shots. It's about Laquan McDonald and his 16 shots by the police that killed him and took his life. It's again, heartrending and informative, and it's an honest insight into a wildly messed up situation. So we'll link all those in the show notes. So stay tuned next week. Crap, forgot to pick it, but I'm going to say we're going to do A Few Good Men. We're going to go back to rewatchable 90s movies. Aaron Sorkin, one of his finest works. So stay tuned for next week when we do A Few Good Men. And don't forget, subscribe, review us on iTunes, leave us a note, especially on this episode. If you want clarification, if maybe we misspoke or didn't really make a point clear, feel free to do that. I'll also link the soundbite from Shamari and Gerald's story as he wrote it without all my flavoring added on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Gerald, I couldn't do that more justice. And if you want to talk about anything else on this episode, please do so. You can do all of that at thepestlepodcast.com/13th.
And the quote of the day that we'll leave you with is so good. You kill me with these quotes. It's from Malcolm X. Be peaceful, be courteous, obey the law, respect everyone. But if someone puts his hand on you, send him to the cemetery.
If you don't have the right to protect yourself in America, in this fucking world, what's the point of anything? This is the thing that I will never be able to wrap my head around, is if the idea a cop unjustly puts his hands on me and I cannot defend myself. I promise it's a good thing I've never had a bad encounter with a police officer, because
you might not be here.
I may not be here. And I don't say that as someone who thinks, I'm just Billy Badass. I'm a toothpick, but I physically don't like being touched by people I don't want touching me. I react very viscerally and strongly to that stuff. And I just don't know that I would do a good job of containing myself. It would be.
But the onus is on you to prove that the cop has done something wrong.
Right.
Like that's the problem we're talking about here. It's always their word against yours, and they will always believe their word.
Yep.
And to all my black friends out there, that is a quote for you specifically, right? Like, this is, in these protests, be peaceful, be courteous, obey the law, respect everyone. Absolutely. But I mean, sometimes violence, man.
Sometimes violence.
I mean, even MLK said it. Sometimes violence is necessary. And I'm not calling anybody to do violence. against anyone, but I am saying that
and we're not
for change
cheering
to
it
happen
on.
sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And no one's cheering it on. No one's saying yay, but everyone is understanding why. And America has a really hard problem trying to understand why without feeling like they're condoning something. They're not the same thing.
Right.
You can understand.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and Malcolm, you know, as much as people like to deride Malcolm X, I find it hard to believe that we would have had progress without him. We needed an MLK. We needed a Malcolm X.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe the next person will be somewhere in the middle. Who knows?
Yeah.
Not sure. This has been really amazing conversation, and I'm sure that the comments are probably going to blow up, and that's fine. I hope that they do, and I hope that this incites some conversations, some hard conversations with our listeners. So thank you guys for joining us through the whole thing. We appreciate it, and Wes, I want to thank all your friends for sharing their stories, and even the ones that weren't able to. I know that they have those stories, and I love them for them, and I hope that things get better. So, but until next time, everybody love each other, be nice, be courteous, obey the law, respect everyone. And I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.